This war, terrible in its dimensions and very changeable in its fate, brought on Rome countless misfortunes and the most dangerous dangers. Here Plutarch is speaking of the social wars, a time that pitted father against son, family against family, and of course, a time in which both brave and cowardly generals alike would show their might. This is part 2 of Sertorius, so if you haven't already, go back and watch part 1 to see how it leads up to this. We are now at the midpoint of his life, and in the previous episode we ended with Sertorius earning a promotion and getting posted as military tribune in Hispania, sometime around 97 BC. Almost immediately upon his arrival, Sertorius would once again demonstrate his brilliance in command. The town of Castulo and their Roman garrison had become infamous in the region for all the wrong reasons. They were hated by the natives for their lack of discipline and constant drunken and violent behavior. This hatred boiled over, and soon enough the native population of the town began scheming. A neighboring tribe were then invited to come and liberate the town, and that is exactly what they did. They snuck through an unguarded gate in the dark of night, and catching the Romans unaware, many of them were either slaughtered in their sleep or too drunk to put up a fight. Sertorius, though, was not asleep or overly drunk. He was ready. He managed to escape the chaos and began rounding up portions of soldiers from other areas of the city. He then ordered that the remaining exits be secured and sealed off, then led his men in a counterattack against the tribesmen. It would be victory or death. There was no other option. The night ended in a slaughter. All military-age males, whether they participated in this revolt or not, were cut down where they stood. Blood ran through every street in the town. But Sertorius was not yet finished. Much like in his earlier accolades, Sertorius stripped off his armor, relinquished his weapons, and dressed in the clothing of his slain enemies. The surviving portions of the Roman garrison did the same too. And at dawn, they marched towards the lands owned by the very same tribe that had attacked them. Believing them to be their kinsmen returning with Roman loot, the tribesmen swung open their gates, and the disguised Romans quickly overwhelmed the city. Many of the inhabitants were put to the sword, and those deemed more docile were sold into slavery. This style of warfare was very unconventional by traditional Roman standards, and earned Sertorius a great level of fame throughout Hispania and beyond. The man who in one night had both defended a city and conquered another. For the next 5 years, Sertorius would be elevated and serve as a senior officer, first under the governor Titus Didius, and then under his successor, Gaius Valerius Flaccus. For the most part, his life was consumed with the pacification of the surrounding tribes and peoples. He would learn a great deal about the native people of Hispania during this stint, and later use this with great effect. After his time in Hispania, Sertorius returned to Rome and would quickly find himself playing a key role in the upcoming social wars of 91 to 87 BC. First, he served as an elected quaestor in Cisalpine Gaul. Here he would levy troops and obtain massive amounts of weapons for the war effort. Details of exactly what he did are scant, but we can be sure that he contributed a significant amount in these years, as the historian Sallust commends Sertorius by saying, "Many successes were achieved under his leadership, but these have not been recorded in history, firstly because of his humble birth, and secondly because the historians were ill-disposed towards him." In addition to this, we also know that Sertorius sustained a serious wound and lost the use of his eye. As Plutarch states, Sertorius used his wounds as personal propaganda. Being scarred in the face had its advantages. Other men, he used to say, could not always carry about them the evidence of their heroic achievements. Their tokens, wreaths and spears of honor, must at some point be set aside. His proof of valor remained with him at all times. It is because of stories like these that upon his second return to Rome in 89 BC, he had the reputation of a great war hero. A true Roman, unwavering and loyal to the state above all else. He had even lost an eye to show for it. This great popularity allowed Sertorius to run for the tribune of the plebs in that same year. However, his efforts were thwarted by the leading man of his time, Cornelius Sulla. His reason for doing this are not entirely clear. Historians debate whether it could be down to a personal rivalry, or the fact that there was a fear that, as Sertorius served under Marius and was therefore more inclined towards him, and by extension the Populares faction, that he would act against Sulla's interests. Either way, Sertorius did not win this election, but was, at the very least, granted a seat in the Senate. This rivalry between Marius and Sulla would soon transform into a full-scale civil war. Without going into too much detail, Sulla at first marched on Rome in 88 BC and exiled Marius. But by 87 BC, the consul Lucius Cornelius Cinna teamed up with Marius to recruit an army and successfully retake Rome. During this time, due to the earlier opposition of Sulla, Sertorius joined with the Marians and took part in some minor skirmishes and battles. The most important action that Sertorius performed during this time came after the death of Marius in 86 BC. He had previously disapproved of Marius's use of a violent slave army, and once he had the opportunity, he had his own men raid the camp and slaughter them all in the dead of night. Plutarch sums up the next 3 years as follows. Cinna was murdered, and against the wishes of Sertorius, and against the law, the younger Marius took the consulship, while men as Carbo, Corbanus, and Scipio had no success in stopping Sulla's advance in Rome. So the Marian cause was being ruined and lost. Cowardice and weakness by the generals played its part, and treachery did the rest. And there was no reason why Sertorius should stay watching things go from bad to worse through the inferior judgment of men with superior power. To put it simply, Sulla crushed the Marians and was advancing ever closer to Rome. To make things worse, Sertorius's advice was pushed aside every step of the way. Blunder after blunder, and Sertorius finally decided to cut ties and head back to the place where he had first gained such renown, to the province of Hispania. Though this time, he was not to be an officer under the command of someone else. He would be the governor. A governor in exile, a man on the run. Soon the full weight of Rome's legions would come bearing down upon him. In the next part of this series, we will witness the conclusion of the social wars that plagued Rome, and find out exactly why Sertorius is often called the Brave Heart of Hispania.